It was triple vodka Red Bulls for £1.50 in the university club. And we
£1.50?
Yeah, £1.50, triple. I was drinking really heavily. I was not remembering how I'd got home a lot of the time. I woke up and I just said, I can't live like this anymore.
Broadly, you think everybody would be healthier, happier, and would sleep better if they didn't drink?
I'm not trying to take away anyone's right to drink. I just think we should be able to have more honest, open conversations about what alcohol is, how it might be affecting people, and have sensible conversations.
Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan Guru-Murthy, and this is the podcast where we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. My guest today turned her own life story and problems with mental health into a movement, creating the Sober Girl Society after getting to grips with her own drinking and the problems it led to in her own life. Millie Gooch is helping thousands of young people rethink their relationship with alcohol and sparking a much wider conversation about drinking, well-being, and what she calls hangxiety, which is the title of her new book. Millie, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you could change the world, what would you do?
I would love us to have more open, balanced, nuanced conversations about alcohol. I think that's the big one that I would like to change.
What is it about the conversation around alcohol that isn't those things?
I think there's kind of two aspects. The first one is, when we talk about alcohol a lot of the time, you'll be told you're trying to take away people's fun, or you're being preachy, or, the one I get is, I bet you're fun at parties. And then I think you have kind of the other end is that there's a lot when we talk about, say, addiction that there's a lot of stigma around it. There's a lot of lack of sympathy. There's a lot of people have done this to themselves. And I don't think there's enough open, just honest takes. I think, the biggest one is probably that I get called preachy just for talking about this subject. And I would love that to not be a thing.
Where do you stand on moderation?
Moderation, if it works for you, it works for you, but it doesn't work for everyone. And I think those are the kind of conversations that we need to be having as well of alcohol is not just this thing that works the same for everyone. It is slightly different. I'm not a prohibitionist. I'm very clear about that. I'm not trying to take away anyone's right to drink. I just think we should be able to have more honest, open conversations about what alcohol is, how it might be affecting people, and basically we just need to talk about it more and have sensible conversations.
I mean, you've been talking about this area now for some time. I mean, from your own experience and the way people react to you, do you think this is a growing issue for young people?
Yeah, I think so. I think the conversation is moving and changing rapidly. I think, a few years ago it was actually looking like, Gen Z are drinking less. And, there was this real they've all become really health conscious. And I think now actually, though, there is a little bit of a turning point and there's a bit of sort of skepticism with all those figures of actually, is it because they're, doing more drugs? Is it because they're vaping more? Is this a good thing because maybe they're more socially disconnected? So I think the conversation is changing. I think there's also a bit of a pushback to this sort of self-optimization.
I mean, do you think there's been a generational shift as well, though? I mean, as a parent, I slightly feel this. It's sort of that my kids who are at university age, all of their contemporaries, they're complete animals. It's and they drink the way my generation did 35 years ago.
Yeah, this is what I mean with the skepticism of I don't actually think it is that reflective. We do hear a lot of stories about Gen Z drinking less, but actually I don't know if they necessarily are. I think a lot of them are drinking in the same way or they're drinking a little bit later. I think we're sort of seeing maybe the way that they're drinking has changed, especially because, with the cost of living crisis, a lot of them can't afford to necessarily go out to the same places that we would have. So you're seeing more people maybe doing house parties or drinking at home and things like that. So I think the way they're drinking is changing. I don't necessarily buy into the fact that they're all this kind of really health conscious generation.
What is hangxiety?
Hangxiety is essentially, from a scientific level, it is a neural rebound. That kind of when you drink, alcohol does certain things to your brain chemistry, and the next day it tries to sort of course correct. So there's the chemical effect of kind of hangxiety, but the way I talk about it in the book as well is also this kind of loop of a lot of the time the thing that we're chasing with alcohol is often made a little bit worse sometimes by drinking. So for me, I was drinking because I was quite anxious as a teenager, and drinking would kind of help ease that anxiety in the moment. But of course, the next day, then I would be 10 times more anxious. And then I got into this cycle of drinking to feel better and it just going around.
I mean, you say, of course, you were 10 times more anxious. Just unpack that a bit.
Yeah, so for me, one of the biggest things was blackout. So I really drank quite quickly, and I'm quite small, and blackouts are a thing that we don't sort of talk about enough, I don't think of. Like, I would not remember parts of my night when I would go out, and I was drinking very heavily, and the next day this caused this like complete, what did I do last night? What did I say? And that was a big reason behind my like anxiety, but just also the way that it affects your brain chemistry. It can make you more anxious the next day.
So you're worried about what you did the night before?
Yeah, a lot of the time it would be because of not remembering, and I would sort of like fill in the blanks, but also I would just the next day, you know, like my sleep would have been so affected. So the next day I was more anxious and more stressed and all of that kind of thing. So for me, it was creating more anxiety the next day.
So you're not talking so much about addiction as you are about the normal effects on vast numbers of people who drink a lot.
Yeah, so I talk about sort of the whole spectrum, to be honest. So, you know, addiction is on a spectrum. So we might be having conversations talking about, you know, people who I would say I was kind of in this like middle grey area of like I wasn't waking up and it was the first thing that I was doing, but actually every time I went out I was drinking to excess. I had become reliant on it in terms of going out for confidence, for all of that sort of stuff. And I sort of talk about things in terms of like, we have this idea that, oh, you're not that bad, you can keep drinking. And I want to change the conversation of, you know, deciding at what point we intervene with people and talking more about prevention and stopping people getting to that kind of like real addiction area. But we do talk about it more now on a spectrum.
So can we talk about your own experience?
Of course.
So when you say you were drinking huge amounts, what are you talking about? At what age?
Yeah, so my drinking really started when I went to university. So I wasn't a big drinker before I went to university. And I turned 18 about 3 weeks before I went. And I got a job in a bar that pretty much sold shots and Jaeger bombs. And I turned into like a nothing drinker to like a 3-4 night a week drinker. And I had come from this very like small environment where I knew everyone. And when I went into university, it was just a whole different ball game for me. I was like finding it really hard to make friends. I like didn't know how to socialize with people. I felt quite academically stupid in a lot of settings, and a lot of like insecurity sort of started creeping in. And I found alcohol and it just became this like catch-all for all those things that I was going through. I was like, great, I can talk to people now, I can be confident, I can not worry about those things that I'm worrying about. And it just took me so quickly. So I was like heavily drinking. We used to have, it was triple vodka Red Bulls for £1.50 in the university club. And we would,
£1.50?
Yeah, £1.50 triple. We're going back, so 2009 was when I went to university. So we would get 2 in a pint glass and tip them in together. And that was my drinking for like years. And then I left university, I went to work in PR and then journalism. And they were both, to me, quite booze heavy industries of like going out quite a lot of time, free drinks. And so on a weeknight, I was drinking really heavily. I was like commuting from London to Kent and not remembering like how I'd got home a lot of the time, putting myself in really dangerous situations.
Or what would have happened.
Yeah. And it was that real, I started drinking at the time of like Geordie Shore, when it was like going out and getting absolutely mortal. And that was the drinking I sort of aspired to, of like, yeah, we're going to go out and we are going to get so blackout drunk. I just never, sensible drinking wasn't just, it wasn't in my repertoire. It wasn't something that I ever sort of like, quote unquote,
Can you explain that a little bit? Because I mean, again, it's something, you know, I notice with the young people I know that there is quite a different attitude. You know, the idea of social drinking or drinking just for, you know, in kind of what I would regard as normal levels is not, they're not interested. And if you say, would you like a glass of wine? They're like, no, you know, if you've got a triple vodka and Red Bull, then yes, fine.
Yeah.
What's that about?
I think binge drinking is just sort of like hammered into us when we're young. And especially like for me, the university culture is so binge heavy. I think we don't necessarily have that maybe more like European culture of, having a wine with dinner. And I mean, there's a lot of arguments that go back and forth of, you know, whether it is a more sensible idea to kind of introduce alcohol to, you know, kids when they're younger because it stops them forming XYZ relationship with it. But then there's also arguments that show, you know, research says that actually the earlier you sort of get them into alcohol, the more likely they are to have issues with it. So it's really hard, but I think particularly in Britain, we have such a binge drinking culture. I mean, we're known as boozy Brits. So I think you have that kind of mentality from when you're young that this is how we drink.
And so had you become an alcoholic?
I find it really hard when people talk to me about this question because people have sort of different ideas of what that term means. Like if I was going to a meeting, like an AA meeting, they might say, yes, this is that. But I mean, medically, it's actually no longer really used as a term. We kind of go with alcohol use disorder now. So it's really hard for me to quantify because it wasn't something that I was waking up every morning. But then also, if you look at my drinking, someone would say you were drinking quite alcoholically. I've had people, when I say I don't necessarily identify with that term, say, well, you clearly were. So I tried not to use the term because I also think it kind of creates this binary of like you either are or you aren't. And I think a lot of us go, well, you know, I can keep drinking. My relationship with alcohol is fine. I'm not an alcoholic.
I mean, you talk about that in the book a little bit about, you know, being an alcoholic also implies you're someone who can't handle their booze.
Yeah, I think it gives us this like you're faulty, you're weak, you don't have willpower. And I think we ignore kind of the fact that this actually is an addictive substance that is heavily glamorized, heavily promoted to us by an industry making money from it. And I think, you know, alcoholic is quite a good term for them because it's like, well, you know, we've given you this product and if you can't, you know, deal with the fact that it's addictive and the ramifications of it, that's your fault because you are faulty, weak and you're an alcoholic. And I don't think it's a necessarily helpful term and I think it stops so many people reevaluating their relationship with alcohol.
What about the word addict?
I think it's sort of the same. I'm very much like, if that is the word that you use and you find empowering, I would never dream of taking that away. A lot of people find so much power in alcoholic and addict, but there is this now school of thought that actually, you know, it's not really like first person language. It kind of dehumanizes people of you're an addict and that's all you are. So now they'll tend to use words like person with addiction or person with, you know, alcohol addiction. So again, I'm not, if people want to use it, I'm not being like, I'm trying to take that away from you. But I think there is merit in the conversation of not necessarily using those words to open up this to people who might not want to tackle their relationship with alcohol or whatever substance because they don't want to identify with those terms. But actually their life might be 10 times better if they actually stopped or rethought it.
I mean, the big point you're making is that alcohol hasn't been part really of the conversation around mental health, which has been an enormous conversation in the last few years. Just explain that.
Yeah, I think we miss it out so much. I see so much discourse now these days of, you know, mental health, and we have Mental Health Awareness Week and Mental Health Day, and we rarely talk about alcohol. And actually, if you look at all of the like statistics, it's, you know, it's so heavily involved in sort of like self-harm rates or suicide rates, and actually, you know, when people talk about anxiety and depression and the things that they use to cope with them, alcohol consistently comes up in the research, but we don't really talk about it. I think part of it goes back to that kind of like preachy element. I think there is also this idea that we know it's not great for us in a lot of those things, but we don't have necessarily the toolkit of, you know, how do we deal with stress, anxiety, all those things without it. So I just think it's quite often missed from the mental health conversation. I think that sometimes there's a lot of disconnect and, you know, there's a lot of what I call mental health washing now, which is, you know, you have things like greenwashing where a company tries to pretend that they're really environmentally friendly, but actually, you know, in the back end, their garments are like, you know, they're underpaying garment workers and they're polluting rivers. And I think we've got this thing with mental health washing now that companies where their products might actually affect mental health are, you know, donating money to mental health campaigns or saying they're tackling the loneliness epidemic by getting everyone out for a beer without ever acknowledging actually the role that alcohol can play in mental health. So I think that's a really sort of like interesting thing that we're seeing now with the alcohol industry.
But I mean, the thing you say right at the beginning of the book is that, you know, we mustn't confuse causation with correlation.
100%.
So what do you actually think the role of alcohol is in, you know, what seem to be identified rises in certain mental health conditions?
I think that people are struggling with their mental health at the moment, especially there's so many factors like the state of the world, cost of living crisis. And I think alcohol is an easy solution for people to turn to. It's super normalized. We're seeing even the rise of things like delivery apps where you can now just at the touch of a button get alcohol delivered to your door. I think it is an easy solution for people, but slowly over time, I think it is actually for a lot of people making those problems worse. And then they're not just dealing with, you know, a mental health issue. They might also now be dealing with an alcohol or substance use like issue.
So just explain how and why it makes things worse.
Yeah, so alcohol can like interfere from everything from our sleep to, you know, how it affects our stress systems to our brain chemistry. Our brains can slowly over time start to adapt and rewire themselves to always be kind of like expecting alcohol. And I think also like it just can affect so many things indirectly. So, for me, I was constantly broke because I was just going out and spending so much money. My relationships with my friends and family weren't great. And I was always, causing, issues on nights out and things that people weren't happy with. And I think there's so many ways that indirectly it can affect us as well as the direct causes as well. And I think the largest part as well is that it can stop us actually tackling the root cause. I spoke in the book to a lot of people who had different mental health conditions, so obsessive compulsive disorder or borderline personality disorder or even post-traumatic stress disorder. And a lot of people had been using alcohol as like a crutch for these things and a coping mechanism, and really without tackling the kind of root cause of what they were struggling with. So a lot of them had avoided therapy and just used alcohol instead.
And the problem with that seems to be that there are some reasons with some problems that you may have, whether it's sleep or some other problem, where alcohol does seem to help.
Sleep is an interesting one because sleep does, in theory, knock you out, help you sleep. So help you fall asleep. So if you're struggling to get to sleep, it feels like an easy solution. But the way alcohol affects your sleep is it completely sort of like disorganizes the sleep process. So actually the next day it can leave you more wired, more emotionally reactive. And then you get into the cycle of using alcohol for sleep. But actually it's not a very helpful tool. It's just that we have this idea that, we have the nightcap myth of, but it does help you fall asleep because it's sort of like a sedative. But whether it actually helps you during the night is, up for debate. And the sleep physiologist I interviewed for the book said no, very much.
I mean, you talked a little bit about how it affected you and blackouts and things like that. I mean, what was the real impact on your life? Where did you get to the point at which you then had to take yourself in hand?
I was just miserable. I just hated my life. It had eroded any kind of like self-respect I had for myself or self-trust. I was just so miserable. I felt like a complete failure. I couldn't understand why I couldn't just go out, have a few nice drinks. And I was just always waking up the next day, having an existential crisis, feeling suicidal. Like there were so many times where I would just, ring a friend or a family member and I was just crying down the phone. And then, throughout the week, I'd feel so anxious. I'd feel down, and alcohol was this like only relief that I had. And I felt like I just couldn't get out of this cycle. And I like to think I'm a very strong, resilient person. I just couldn't crack it because it was so normalized and really hard to understand. And I couldn't understand why I just got a grip on it. So I was just like making stupid mistakes, waking up in places and being like, how did I get here? Putting myself in really dangerous situations. And I just didn't want to be here anymore. It was just making me so miserable.
I mean, in the course of the research that you've done, what have you learned about how much of the way you would feel afterwards was about the effect of alcohol on your brain, and how much was it underlying anxieties, conditions that you may have had?
I think it was such a mix, to be honest. Like there's so much research on how it affects your brain in terms of on your sleep, on your stress system, on your anxiety, the way it affects your brain chemistry. And I think that was a huge part of it. But for someone who is already anxious, it can make you way more anxious. And I think that's what I was finding, is that all those issues that I had were just exacerbated every time I drank. And I think when I stopped drinking, I was actually able to tackle those things. I was actually able to go to therapy, seek support, meet like-minded people, understand my brain a bit better, and learn coping mechanisms for those things instead of just going out and getting absolutely obliterated. And that was the biggest thing for me, is just, when I stopped drinking, I didn't magically go, oh my God, I feel amazing. I actually had to work at it and understand why I was feeling this way, and, take up new hobbies and coping mechanisms and all these things that actually, have helped me now have a really lovely life that I feel so happy in. It wasn't just stop drinking. So I think it was a mix of things.
So how did you do it?
It was just one of those like fate things. I think I woke up and I just said, I can't live like this anymore. I just don't want to. And I told all my friends that I wasn't drinking anymore, and they all thought it was hilarious because I'd said a million times, oh, I'm never drinking again. And something in me just made me stick to it. I read everything I could about alcohol, and I read sobriety books, and I listened to podcasts. I think it was like the first time I actually engaged in this subject. And I think podcasts are an incredible resource for someone, especially going through, this, who doesn't necessarily want to walk into a meeting or go and get help for it. And so I listened, I absorbed, and then I started meeting other people. And for me, the connection aspect, I think, was key, because none of my friends, however supportive, felt the way I did after a night out. And so I felt like an alien.
So you were different. It was
100%. I would wake up, my friends would be like, you're fine. And I would be spiraling. And I just never met anyone who had a brain like me that felt that way the next day. So when I met other people, I was like, oh my God, I actually have the least unique story in the world.
I mean, normally people who are trying to stop drinking will meet other people through AA or NA. Why is that not right for you?
When I stopped drinking, I didn't know a single other sober person, and the only depictions I had of AA were what I had seen on telly. And I thought I was going to turn up and it was going to be 70-year-old men, and I was going to say, oh, actually, I can go a few days without drinking. When I do drink, I kind of can't stop. And they would laugh me out and say, come back when you've lost your job or, ruined your family. And I know so much about AA now, have friends that swear by the program, love the program. But at the time, it just didn't feel like the right fit for me because of what I knew. I didn't necessarily identify.
Just felt too young.
I felt too young. I felt too female, as in I always had just everything I'd ever seen in movies was just mainly men sitting in a circle. And so I never felt like that was going to be the right option for me. And I also think I always kind of knew deep down that I was drinking for a reason, and that was the thing I needed to tackle, not necessarily the drinking. So once I kind of said I'm going to stop drinking, it was tackling everything else, I think.
And so why did you then feel the need to start a new society?
Yeah, I think there were a lot of things that I started going through that I was about 7 months sober when I started Sober Girl Society, and I had things that I wanted to talk about, like, is it normal that I can't stop crying? Is it oh, I'm going on a date next week, and actually I've told the guy that I don't drink and he has made some horrible remarks. What do I do in that situation? And I was asking my friends. And
don't go on the date?
Yeah, don't go on the date, exactly. It was more like, how do I reply to this guy and, tell him to stick it? And I kind of would speak to my friends and they'd be really helpful, but I was like, they just don't necessarily get it. So I was like, I want to meet other people. I want to meet like-minded people. And so that's why I set it up. I remember seeing at the time there was a community on Instagram that was for girls that were talking about the body positivity conversation. I thought, wow, it'd be really cool if there was something like that for girls that don't drink. They could just meet up, chat, do some fun stuff without alcohol. Because also I was 26 when I stopped drinking. Everything that my friends did and my social life revolved around drinking. I was like, I actually want to do some other things, because I still love going to bars and clubs, but I didn't want to do that every weekend anymore. And so, I decided that I was going to start an Instagram page to find other girls like me. Didn't realise that it would turn into a full-time job.
I mean, how did it take off, and how did people come to see it?
Yeah, I actually have no idea a lot of the time. It's just one of those things that I think I started talking and then people would follow and they would tell their friends. And then I remember we had our first meetup, and then people would, take a picture at the meetup and post it on their Instagram. And then I remember my cousin who lives in America, he rang me one day and said, this is really crazy, but I've just heard Sober Girl Society mentioned on NPR. And I didn't even know what NPR was. And I just looked at my phone and the people were just flooding in. It was just crazy.
Have you always been the kind of person who wanted to organise things?
Not really, but I have always been, so my background was actually journalism. So I was a writer. I love writing about things. That's how I have always understood my own brain. So at the same time, I was writing about the things that I was going through. And this was when Instagram wasn't necessarily videos. It was you put a picture of your lunch up and you write a really long caption. So I would put a picture up and be like, today is day, blah, blah, blah. This is what I'm going through. And that was the process that actually started. And funny enough, I didn't think anyone would come to a meetup if I organised it. And one girl messaged me and said, I think there's something in this, maybe we could all meet up in London. And I said, well, I don't think so, but if you want to organise it, I'll help you and I'll turn up and it'll be great. And we organised it, and it was 30 girls that all turned up, and I was like, oh my God, people want this connection. And from there we just started doing regular meetups.
And what happens at the meetups?
Anything and everything. We try and tackle things that people struggle with. And it might sound a bit, frivolous to some people, but a lot of people say to me, oh, I'd love to stop drinking, but I just couldn't get on a dance floor sober. And we were like, okay, let's run dance classes. And then other people would say, oh God, I just don't know how to meet other people or actually instigate conversations. So we were like, right, let's do friend speed dating. So And then other people would say, I've got no other hobbies that aren't drinking. So it'd be like, right, let's go rock climbing. So we do a whole mix of things. And, it's not a recovery program. It's not AA adjacent. It's, not trying to...
It's not 12 steps.
It's not 12 steps. There's no requirement. Also, even if you're someone who drinks, you're still welcome to come if you just want to do something fun that doesn't revolve around alcohol.
Well, that's what I mean. So what is the difference then between what you're doing and AA and the 12 steps? I mean, is it that you're not running a program to help people stop drinking?
Yeah, we're not a recovery program.
You are a club for people who are stopping drinking.
Exactly. We are just a community. So we do run some different workshops. So online we'll have speakers come on, they'll talk about their sobriety journey, but it's not a recovery program. We have loads of girls that do AA alongside, or NA or CA or whatever that might be. We have girls that, have been to rehab and then they come out and they just want to meet other girls that don't drink. So yeah, we're not a recovery program. We are just a community for girls who don't drink. But we also, I went back to university and got my master's degree and things because I wanted to be really super educated and informed. And so we do a lot of content around kind of, the science behind drinking and things like that. So we have a lot of educational resources, but we aren't a program. What
do you think are the key things we don't talk about and don't really understand about the science around drinking?
Yeah, I think the moderation piece is interesting because I think, everyone thinks that drinking works the same for people and we all have the same brains, and moderation should be easy for everyone. And I think we don't talk about, how some brains find it harder to moderate than others. I think we don't talk about the fact that, the way drinking actually affects your brain makes it harder for you to moderate because it affects your prefrontal cortex. So it's the thing that, helps you make rational decisions and weigh up right or wrong. And so once you start drinking, it's very hard to then be like, oh, I'm going to stop now. For a lot of people,
the whole notion of knowing when to stop is kind of an oxymoron, isn't it?
Exactly, because the first part of your brain to be affected is the part that would help you moderate. So I think we have that. I think we have this idea, that people just think it's all a matter of willpower and giving up drinking is all about willpower. And, a lot of it is actually about habit and, doing the same thing just over and over again and changing your environment. I think there's a lot with that. And I think the other big one is obviously that people who don't drink are boring. And actually a lot of the people I've met have stopped drinking because if anything, they're too fun. So I think there's a lot of wrong ideas that we have and just I think the conversation needs to just sort of mix up and start again.
Well, I mean, the thing about, people not drinking being boring is also the other way around, isn't it? The people who are stopping drinking find it hard often to socialise in normal settings because they feel boring rather than other people thinking that they are boring.
Yeah.
So what's your view on that and how to stop feeling boring?
I think it's a mix. I think you have to be so comfortable in your reasons. I personally don't feel boring anymore. At the beginning, yes, I did, because you're like a baby alien. You're like, I've never been out in a social environment and not drunk. But as time has gone on, I have learned to relax in social environments. I've learned to be myself. I'm quite confident now in a social situation that I can make a conversation with someone. All those things that alcohol gave me, I have been forced to learn how to get those things myself. So I think that is the biggest one for me is I have learned all those things that I think so many of us just give credit to alcohol. I always say with our meetups, everyone comes in, they feel really awkward. It is awkward. That's just natural. And then people start making conversation. They'll settle into their environment. All of a sudden it's so loud and chatty and busy and all those things that I think often we give the credit to alcohol when actually if we just wait long enough, a lot of those things will naturally happen and we'll feel more comfortable in our environment. So I think that's a big one.
But aren't you also saying that there are lots of people who think they have a perfectly normal, manageable relationship with alcohol, but they don't really?
Do I think everyone's lives could be better? Possibly, yeah. Do I want to take it away from them if they are happy and that's how they want to live their life? No, that's their life. That is up to them how they would want to live it.
Broadly, you think everybody would be healthier, happier, and would sleep better if they didn't drink?
I think there is an argument for it, yeah. I hate to be that's absolutely what I think. My whole point is about having more nuanced conversations. And there are some people that are going to be well, I love my glass of rosé on a Friday night and that is the one thing I look forward to and that is what makes me happy. I don't want to take that away from people. I really don't. But, for the rest of the majority of people who might be drinking for stress and it's making them more stressed, or they're drinking to fall asleep and actually they don't realize that it's ruining their sleep, or I think those are the people that I would love to hear this message. But if they want to carry on drinking, I'm not going to stop them. That's not what I'm trying to do. I just think it's more honest conversations, because then people feel like they can actually, go for help when they need it.
How do you think we should navigate medical advice on drinking? You can read a different thing online or in the newspaper pretty much every day about what is a healthy level of drinking, whether it's good to have a small amount of red wine for your heart, whether you should drink at all when you're pregnant, or whether it's okay for a bit and then not. How do we actually work out who's telling us the truth?
Yeah, I think we need to stop sensationalizing a lot of headlines, like, oh, tequila's the secret to weight loss, or like, these are the 5 wines you need if you want to live till 100. Like, I think we need to, I think journalists have a bit more of a responsibility to not do a lot of those clickbaity headlines that don't necessarily interrogate the actual paper or whatever they're talking about. I think that is a thing that definitely needs to change. But it's really hard because there's so much ad revenue, and the more clicks you get, the more people that are going to share tequila's the secret to weight loss with their friend on Facebook. Great for that company. So I think it's really hard, but I think that's one of the first things that we need to talk about, and just talk about some of those myths honestly, and have these conversations without automatically being labelled as preachy or judgmental. I think that is the place to start, I think.
I mean, this is also part of the economic establishment. Isn't that? I mean, there's a huge amount of money in alcohol, a huge amount of business, not least pubs and hospitality, and a lot of tax revenue.
A huge amount, yeah. I think that is one of the other things that I would love people to talk about more. I think we put so many industries under a microscope, and we're really politically savvy these days, but the alcohol industry is an industry that seems to avoid any kind of scrutiny. And, if you do start talking about it, you're a prohibitionist, you're this, you're that. And I think that is an area, it is $1 trillion industry. They're not just small family run businesses. And also when we're having conversations about things like, pubs, or actually sometimes if we talk about the alcohol industry a bit more, we can kind of help pub culture, because, a lot more people are drinking at home now because booze is so cheap. They can get it delivered on an app. They're not going to pubs. And I love the pub. I think people are really surprised when I say I don't drink, but I love the pub. I think community spaces are really important. So we need to have those kind of nuanced conversations about actually where is the alcohol industry affecting that as well. And, we also need to talk about the impact on the NHS. Alcohol costs the NHS a huge amount of money, and we sort of absolve it as a bit of a routine cost. And I think that's
crime.
Really, and crime, exactly, on social services. I think all of those things we need to talk about a little bit more, and we don't.
And why do you think we don't? Is it because of the economic power, or is it that we don't want to?
I think it's a mix. I think it is such a politically sensitive topic as well. I've spoke to MPs over time about, policy regulations that we think would kind of help. And actually it's if it's in a time where there's a vote or anything like that, they don't want to say anything that's going to rock the boat too much. So they have to go with policies that, look really pro-pub, or that people are going to be on board with. It's not, I don't know if you saw the Green MP, Hannah, who spoke about not drinking in Parliament. She was booed in Parliament and trolled online, and all she said was, I don't think that MPs should be drinking and then voting. I think it's to stick your head out and talk about alcohol, you are just putting yourself out there to get absolutely vilified. So I think that's one of the reasons we ignore it. But also, there's bars in Westminster that are subsidised. There's a lot of alcohol industry ties, and I think that's another thing that we
do you get trolled? There's a big difference between your message and Hannah Spencer, I suppose, in tone. And I suppose what people criticised her for was partly the sort of the judgy nature of what she was saying about other MPs.
Yeah.
And you're clearly very, very strongly trying not to be at all judgy of anybody.
Yeah, because I don't think it works.
Are you a bit scared of sort of what the backlash would be? Or?
No, not really. I just think it stops people listening to your message. I think I've tried it before of when you say things really bluntly, I think you just turn people off with this conversation. The minute they think that you're being judgmental. They will close their ears. They don't want to listen. So it's not, I don't really care about the backlash because I get it regardless.
You do?
Yeah. By the nature of the subject that I talk about, I did a TEDx talk and it was all about alcohol, cocaine and suicide. And the amount of people that were like, oh, I bet you're fun at parties. How boring, live a little. Like, I get it regardless. But I think it's so important that the minute you start talking about this, if you don't come at it open and welcoming to everyone, people just tune out. So it's not about worrying about the backlash, it's that I think it will turn people off from even engaging in this conversation.
How much of a dent do you think you're making in the problem? What's the scale?
A very small one, I think, in the grand scheme of things. I think we're always battling with new problems. I think, we're seeing the rise of these new sort of like nostalgia drinks, like the new rise of alcopops with brands like Buzzballs. I think we're always contending with new things and new policies, and like I said about like the delivery apps, that's now become a real focus of a lot of the campaigns that I work on, is looking at how maybe these apps need to input stops, or that people can sort of like self-exclude in the same way we might talk about gambling. I think we're always facing new problems and new changes. So I think a small dent, but if I can make not even a dent, but if I can just help people not have to feel the way that I did, that's all I care about.
So, in terms of, this is not really an advice book, is it? But what is your advice? If there are people listening to this saying, yeah, I sort of recognise quite a lot of that, what do you think they should do?
I think getting curious. I think so many of us are like, oh God, but I couldn't, like the questions come in before we even have a chance to actually give ourselves a chance of like, well, I couldn't do that because I've got so-and-so's wedding, or I couldn't do that because I wouldn't be able to socialise without alcohol. I think it's like, just dip your toe in, maybe listen to a podcast like this, or maybe read a book, just understand a bit of information. You don't have to declare I'm going sober tomorrow, but I think understanding alcohol, understanding what it does to your brain, how it might be affecting you, I think all of those things are so important, like that knowledge. And it's so hard to actually find that knowledge because we're in this like age of like misinformation, like you said, like what's right, so I think just doing the research yourself, and researching, I always say, like within yourself, what happens when you go out and drink? Do you black out and not remember your night? Do you feel anxious the next day? Like understanding your relationship with alcohol. I think just getting curious, don't put too much pressure on yourself.
Okay, so what's the next step?
The next step is get help if you need it, if you think you need extra support. For me, it's about tackling what it is that you're drinking. So if you are someone who is drinking for stress, what other thing can you do that is going to help you feel less stressed? How can you change up your routine? What new hobby could you take in? If it's that you're drinking because you're really lonely, okay, what group could you join? Could you go out there and volunteer and make friends that way? I think for me, it's always been about tackling that issue. So, but yeah, get help if you need it. Go to AA, go to your local drug and alcohol service. There's so many like support groups online now that you can go to. I think that is the thing. Get support if you need it.
It's quite a big step, though, isn't it?
It is a big step, and I think that's why things like podcasts,
especially if you're only, if you're young and if you're not in the sort of the traditional patterns that we're all used to seeing in the movies or whatever it is, of what is an alcoholic, what is an addict. But that you can feel that there is something wrong. It's quite a big step to go to a doctor or whoever it is and say, I think I've got a problem. How do you get over that?
Well, I think that's why there's some good resources in the meantime that you can go to of like, like I said, the podcast, things like that step that can then hopefully give you the motivation to go and step through. But you've also got a lot of helplines that you can call, a lot of like, if you don't want to necessarily go physically in, you can call the helpline. There's a lot of like online services that you can use.
Where do you think alcohol fits into other drugs?
Oh, I think it's an interesting one. We're actually seeing a rise of girls coming to us who alcohol is not necessarily the main thing that they're struggling with, but actually every time they drink, it either leads them, the two most common ones at the moment are cocaine and ketamine, which were not in my story, so I don't speak to it too much, but that is something we're definitely seeing. And I think, as well as the usual suspect of nicotine, I think a lot of people, when they drink, they are more inclined to smoke. But yeah, ketamine and cocaine are the two big ones that we're seeing a real rise of people come into the platform.
And have you looked at all into how they interact?
Yeah, so alcohol and cocaine especially is an interesting one because it creates a whole new drug together called cocaethylene, which is more toxic to the heart and, has been talked about in a lot of discussions around suicide and the fact that it can give you this kind of like rocket-fueled impulsivity, because when you combine two substances that make you more impulsive. It's going to increase levels of impulsivity. So there was a lot of conversation. There were, unfortunately, 2 Love Islanders who both died by suicide, and both in their toxicology reports had alcohol and cocaine in their system. And the coroner at the time of one of them said about cocaethylene and, its links to suicide. So that one is an interesting one because it's one of the only sort of like 2 drugs that make a whole new compound in itself.
But both those drugs are extremely widely available now and cheap.
Cheaper oftentimes than drinking. And I think that is the cost of living crisis, I think, has had a huge impact on people's relationship with alcohol. And, even I had friends that, do recreational substances. They went to Ibiza a few years ago and they said, we did pills all night because it was cheaper. It was like £10 for a pill. I don't know what it is now. But it was cheaper than drinking because in some of the bars it was like 18 euros for a vodka. So I think that's a thing that we have to, contend with as well. Like things like ketamine and cocaine are getting more available, and everyone knows someone who can get it these days.
So what's your message to Andy Burnham? Because he keeps going on about supporting pubs at the moment.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I do think we need to support pubs because I think also if people don't go to pubs, then they are drinking more at home. And actually, I think that's a slightly more slippy slope because I think, we've all done it when we're at home. You think you're pouring a single measure and actually it's a quadruple, or your small glass of wine is actually a big, large glass of wine. So yeah, I think we do need to support pubs. I think they are great community spaces. I think 2 things can be true at the same time if we also do need to have conversations about alcohol harm and pub culture. Like I think, those things are important.
Well, Millie Gooch, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you so much.
You can watch all of these interviews on the Channel 4 News YouTube channel. Until next time, bye-bye.